Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits VOD, countless others end up DOA. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Corngut. I am a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. Today is an extra special episode because this marks our 1 year anniversary. Can you handle that? I cannot believe it's been a whole year, and I'm super excited to be landing on probably one of my favorite topics ever, as you guys probably already know, because it comes up a lot. Today, we are covering Stephen King's short story, The Jaunt. And we have a very special little guest with us today. Drew, welcome to Development Hell. How's it going?
It's going well, Josh. Happy 1 year anniversary. I didn't get you anything, but I'm very happy.
Rude. You have to leave right now and come back with something. Drew, do me a favor and introduce yourself to the Development Hell audience.
My name is Drew Tinnin. I'm a writer with Dread Central. I've been around the block for a while, just covering festivals and doing interviews. So I've been in the entertainment journalism field, as they say, for about a decade now, covering stuff in New York and California. And now I'm back in Austin, Texas, my hometown, and still reading Stephen King.
I mean, from cradle to grave, right?
There's still a lot I haven't read.
Oh, yeah, me too. I've barely scratched the surface. And I would consider myself like a fairly adept Stephen King fan. I've gone through a lot of it. What would you say your general relationship with the King is? Are you like a mega fan, medium fan, casual fan? What's your deal with Stephen King?
Medium fan, because I think really everybody is kind of a casual fan of Stephen King. I don't know if I've met anyone or talked to anyone that's not read a Stephen King story at some point, and certainly someone that hasn't actually watched anything that has been adapted by him. Mm-hmm. And I don't really remember a time when I didn't know about Stephen King. I mean, his stories have just always been there. That's why it's hard sometimes to still imagine a man behind the typewriter or laptop, whatever his preference is now. So I'm amazed that he's still around, and now he's got an incredible son, Joe Hill, that's going to carry on that tradition as well. So we can just keep reading the Stephen King universe and the Joe Hill kind of universe for decades to come.
Wow, Owen King right now is like crying. He's like, how dare they forget about me? Do you remember what like your introduction to Stephen King was? Do you remember what the first book or even adaptation you encountered?
Well, my mom was a voracious reader and could never really throw a book away, especially if it was in hardback. So she just had a huge collection, and I snuck her copy of Christine, and I read it in her closet. So I don't know why she really couldn't find me. I'm sure she knew I was in there reading it and just didn't do anything. She was probably proud of me.
Huh.
But that ended up being my like King reading spot, and it was just in her, amongst her blouses, and just
so
reading
nice.
Stephen King. Yeah,
that's such a mood.
And I also remember seeing Silver Bullet, and I wrote my own screenplay for that in shorthand when I was like around 10 or so, because I really felt that unmistakable kid connection with Corey Haim's character Marty and that movie. But so I saw the movie, then read it, and then wrote my own screenplay.
Do you still have that somewhere?
No. I mean, it was on just like pages with a number 2 pencil. So who knows where it is.
So that's going to be hard to track down. Yeah. I love that. I would love to adapt a Stephen King piece at some point. And I've never seen the Silver Bullet adaptation. Is that what it's called? the
Silver
actual
Bullet,
film?
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, originally the movie was going to be directed by Don Coscarelli,
Oh, cool.
and it just never came to fruition. But the film version, I think, really actually holds up.
Is the book actually called? Has a different name, right? It's like Cycle of the Werewolf or something. Or am I thinking
Yes,
of something
that's
different
right. No,
completely?
it is Cycle of the Werewolf. Yeah, I think you're right.
Oh, I've never read that one. But I like the sounds of it. I like that it sounds a little bit more YA than some of his other stuff, so I should check it out.
Yeah, it's a good
Cool.
point. Yeah, you're right. It very much is like kind of like a book. You're right.
I would say my first encounter with Stephen King, I'm almost sure Girl Who Loved Time Gordon, and I remember finding it at a Scholastic book fair at like in grade 7 or something. Today we are covering Stephen King's The Jaunt. Yes, I did introduce this because I'm a big fan of Stephen King's short stories. I would say maybe even more than the Stephen King novels. How do the stories sort of rank with you?
The short stories, yeah. I mean, they're the ones that probably stick in my mind the most, I think, and I think they uh, they have some of the most memorable endings, and I think the Jaunt is the one that I remember the most, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of people remember it because if you went going back and reading the story, it's really the ending that's like the real kicker, and I think that a lot of the short stories that King writes really deliver, and some people might say, including me, that in his longer novels sometimes the endings don't work.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely a criticism he faces. Drew, why do you think I asked you to come on this episode to talk about The Jaunt?
I do. I think I believe Twitter was involved,
Yes.
and obviously we do work together. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that we were asked to kind of just come up, write a little blurb, as they say, a little tweet about
Hmm.
our favorite Stephen King stories. And I mentioned the Jaunt, um, and you immediately kind of hit me up
Yeah,
and were
right
like,
away.
"Dude, you love
Right
the
away.
Jaunt too?"
I was like, this is my new best friend. This is BFF forever now. Yeah, as you said, everyone kind of like it is a very infamous short story, but I rarely see it talked about in the organic wilds, and maybe that's just a coincidence. But when I do see it come up, like my heart skips a beat usually, and I get really excited because, as my listeners know, I talk about this short story literally at any point that I am permitted. I've probably talked about this short story like in at least I'm guessing at least 5 of these episodes. I am obsessed with it. We'll get into why probably a little bit more down the line. Do you have any other like favorite Stephen King short stories aside from The Jaunt?
Yeah, I mean, but there's kind of a funny thing with me and King stories. I think I mean I really come through it from the movies first a lot of the times, and also I like it when a story I loved reading ends up getting a fairly maligned film or TV movie adaptation, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those. I'm supposed to feel outrage, right, when the movie version
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do the book justice,
Mm-hmm.
but I that's how what we're all supposed to feel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the cheesiness of some of the movie versions, and I think
Hell yeah.
um, the Night Flyer is definitely one for me.
Oh,
Um,
I fucking love The Night Flyer.
yeah, it's fantastic. But again, like I watched it first and then went back and read it. But I just remember, Miguel Ferrer is, in the film version is actually pretty cool, and it has a really fun noir vibe, fantastic creature effects. But I think the descriptions in the book are actually a lot creepier than the thing you end up seeing on screen. Then I really like the Langoliers as a story,
Yeah.
and then the TV movie, you're like, what is happening? It's just so awful. The VFX are just cringeworthy, and I mean, they're
Hmm.
maybe at the time somebody was scared when it came out, but seeing Bronson Pinchot run from these like giant critters in the sky is not that frightening. But in the book, the idea of them eating everything in existence was pretty terrifying.
It's kind of similar to The Jaunt in some ways. They're both very existential in the terror that they're providing. I love that you brought up The Langoliers and what was the other one? The Night Flyer.
Hmm.
I have never read either because I'm a bad Stephen King fan, but I love both adaptations. The Langoliers is probably one of the very first things I ever watched on Netflix, whenever that was, like 10 years ago. And I remember being like, yeah, this is bad. But something about that miniseries works for me, especially because the first chunk of it is just a bunch of random characters on a plane, and it has this sort of like low quality play vibe to it, and I don't know, I like it. And there's that weird blind kid that gets murdered. I am into it. And I also love the Night Flyer. One of a Development Hell episode that I'm dying to do is this follow-up film to the Night Flyer, which is going to be called Fear of Flying. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah, but it never happened. That's right.
It never happened. So
Mhm.
I reached out to the director before this show even got picked up by Dread Central, and he did not respond, probably because he was like, who is this person? He probably never even saw my message, to be honest. But I gotta follow up because truly, what a fascinating development hell topic that needs to be covered.
I'm sure he's dying to talk about it with you, Josh.
This is the energy I've gotten from people that know him, that he's open to talking about it.
Oh, cool.
Love that first film. Yeah. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of backstory about the first time I read the Jaunt. Does that sound
Okay.
okay with you?
Yeah, shoot.
So I would say the very second editorial piece I ever wrote for Dread Central was about the Jaunt. I read it for the first time on a plane when I was like 14, and it was the first time that I ever was flying alone. And I remember being really nervous to fly alone, and the only like piece of entertainment I brought with me was Skeleton Crew. And I was reading through them, and some of them were more interesting than others. And I remember landing on the Jaunt and just devouring it. Something about reading this specific story on a plane was just extra disturbing. And we'll get to why in a second, but like part of what makes the story so messed up is the fact that it's about this really messed up form of teleportation or like travel. And so reading it on a plane was like really appropriate for some reason. Do you remember the first time you got to this story?
I really don't remember the first time that I read Skeleton Crew. I think for the first time
Mm.
I was definitely young, and like I said before, it's like I feel like some of these stories have just always been there. I do not remember like the first time I really read it, so I don't have like a distinct memory. It was probably in
Mm.
my mom's closet. It probably was in my mom's closet.
I love that. I hope there's like a version of you that's still there reading Stephen King stories and just
Right? Yes, locked away in my own mind.
living. Yeah, yeah. It kind of
Yeah,
sounds like a Stephen King story in its own way, to be honest.
yeah. It's like
Um.
the dream catcher.
Oh, gross.
There you go.
Butt Monsters, not my
Right,
favorite of his books.
right.
So Skeleton Crew. This is the collection of short stories that housed the Jaunt. It was published in 1985, and it was his second short story collection following Night Shift. So some of the stories included in Skeleton Crew are The Jaunt, Survivor Type, The Mist, The Raft, The Reach, Mrs. Todd's Shortcut, and tons of others. Um, Before I get into like my favorite selections from Skeleton Crew, I was wondering, do you have any standouts besides The Jaunt that you remember or that left an impression on you?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I remember Word Processor of the Gods. I remember reading that
Oh.
one, and it was kind of about how technology can drive us crazy, which does have a lot in common, I think, with the Jaunt. It's also a writer that's having a little bit of a god complex, where whatever you write can actually alter reality. And if you write about someone or something and press delete, that person or thing is erased from existence. It's basically this guy, his son makes him a word processor that's kind of his own DIY word processor, and apparently this kid was like really adept. And there's some kind of supernatural elements in it. So if you start writing on this word processor and you want to um, you know make something
Hmm.
disappear in the room just to test, you can say this painting is no longer there, and suddenly it disappears in the actual room. So um,
Cool.
yeah, so he starts doing that with actual human beings to mix results.
I love that. I forget that story 100% completely. Although there's an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark with the exact same plot, so I love that. Although I'm sure
Right.
they're both just pulling from the Twilight Zone in some way or another. That sounds great. I thought that one was about There's another story in this collection about a typewriter with like a little scary monsters living inside of it, and I'm starting to think that that's not the one that you're talking about, and that's okay. Before I tell you mine, do you have any others from the list that you like? You're dying to sort of
I mean,
to
you have to
share.
talk about the mist. I mean, you have. I
Okay,
mean,
well, yeah, The Mist is Like,
if you want to talk about the mist, but I mean that's another ending that really stuck with me, even though it's really open ended.
I love the ending of The Mist compared to the film, because I, like, have a soul. No, The Mist is so scary. The Mist is like really fun, like monster horror that works really well. I do think it gets a little overshadowed by the film because the film was just so good, and the short story, I don't know. I feel like now it's all we think about is the film and that ending. But yeah, The Mist is great. I think it was one of the very first things I read. I read it definitely before I read the book properly. I remember finding it online and going through it and being really freaked out by it. And there's something really scary about that open ending too, because they're probably just going to die. Like, what else could be happening to them? It's not going to be good.
No, not at all. And I mean, that's one thing that is cool about the film is that if you stop it, at a certain point, you can actually just have the ending of the short story.
Hell yes.
You don't have to watch Frank Darabont's ending. But I
Mm.
remember I was at the premiere of that film with like
Oh,
Greg Nicotero was there, and
Frank
Frank
Darabont.
Darabont. And they were in they were in person, and after Darabont's like insanely tragic ending that he added,
Yeah.
it was hard to suddenly be there for a Q&A. I mean, it's a downer ending, and I also really had to pee. Uh, but but I think even King said that if he would have thought of that ending, he would have written it and added it to the short story.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a very good ending. And what's his face really pulls it off, Mr. Thomas Jane. That cast is incredible. I forget the name of. Do you remember the name of the woman that starts the cult in the grocery store?
Marsha Gay Harden.
That's her.
Yeah, yeah.
That is like a horror Oscar performance if there ever was one. If we could like go back in time and give horror Oscars performances Oscars, like I would give that one an Oscar even before Toni Collette.
I'm gonna have to agree with that. Yeah, and I think she also went to the University of Texas, which is my alma mater as well.
Wow. See, it's all
Yeah,
coming together. I love
right.
it. Yeah, The Mist is incredible. Incredible film adaptation. And the other story from this collection that had in my opinion, and I think a lot of fans agree, incredible cinematic adaptation would be The Raft. So I'm assuming you've seen Creepshow 2. If I'm wrong, let me know.
I've definitely seen Creepshow too.
Hell yes. And I know a lot of people feel this way, but Creepshow 2 kind of take it or leave it, except for The Raft. It is such a good story, so brutal and upsetting and scary, and they kind of capture it in the film segment as well, I think.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do remember the short story. They just remembering how cold the water is, and they actually pull that off in the movie too. Where just thinking about swimming in the water and it's supposed to be freezing. That always got to me.
Oh yeah. And it also has more of like the ending is a little bit more up in the air. One of the characters just sort of ends up staring into the oil slick and sort of starts to disassociate, and you can only
Oh,
imagine what's
right.
happening.
That's right.
Could you do me a favor? Could you like attempt to give me a log line, the audience a log line for The Raft? Like tell us what it was about.
Well, the raft, starts off like a lot of horror short stories with a bunch of stupid kids doing something stupid, and they drive out to a lake. Kind of it seems kind of like off season a little bit, and there's nobody around, and they drive out. They swim out to this like small wooden raft that's out in the lake, and once they get on top of it, they're all having the time of their life, and this bizarre kind of oil sludge starts coming over to them, and kind of behaves like it's sentient, which is a little creepy to begin with, and then
Hmm.
starts to basically eat them alive in really horrible, disgusting ways.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's gross as hell. I don't remember if it's only in the film or if it's also in the story. I think it's in both. How it can kind of slip up between the cracks of the raft and like get a
Yes.
hold of them and like pull them through in the most grotesque possible way. I love it.
Yeah,
And,
especially when it's when the strongest person in your group, the coolest, strongest jock, gets taken first,
yeah,
and dies really horribly, then you really know you're in trouble.
yeah. I also remember there being like a really sad sex scene. Does that sound familiar? I feel
Yep,
like they
there
end up
was.
doing it and it's like really weird.
Yeah, well,
which
it's pretty creepy now. Watching it back, I'm sure it was then too. But she's kind of sleeping and he's doing things he shouldn't be doing.
oh really? So it's like not consensual. Maybe that's why I remember it being so sad and creepy. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like one side of
Um,
her face is turned, and then when she
oh
turns over,
no.
then it's all stuck to her when she
Oh,
wakes
it's
up.
so brutal. I love
Yeah,
Stephen King because he's just brutal sometimes in a way that not a lot of other authors can really get to. And I think there's no story that captures that as well as the one that we're going to cover today, which is the Jaunt. And I cannot wait until we get into like the weeds of what the plot is about, and we're almost there. Um, but I also want to just like quickly go through which of these short stories did end up getting cinematic adaptations. So we've mentioned The Mist, we've mentioned The Raft, and are you familiar with the third story here that has a film adaptation, which is Grandma?
yeah, and it's funny. I've never seen Mercy, and I haven't seen Grandma either. That which is like wasn't it a Twilight Zone episode when they
Aha.
rebooted it?
Yes. Yes.
I haven't seen either of
I haven't
those.
seen either as well. But the story itself is very memorable, scary as hell. I don't know how they could have turned that into a feature film. I'm interested in what Mercy looks like, but I haven't heard incredible things.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll kind of add it to the list that this podcast is making me right.
Hell yeah. I mean, you've mentioned it earlier, but I'm a little bit obsessed with Stephen King adaptations. It kind of feels the same void in my heart as like later canon sequels. There's just something fun and comforting about both that I really love. I'm assuming that you know about the Stephen King dollar babies. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I love the whole concept of basically you get charged $1 to be able to adapt something, right, of his.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I am a filmmaker, and I have looked through that list a bunch of times. And one that I see fairly regularly, because the list changes with every year, I think. And one of the items on the list that I see all the time is Uncle Otto's Truck, which is not one of the better stories from Skeleton Crew, but it is one of my favorite. And it's one of the Stephen King stories that uses cars and like car mechanics as a specific subgenre of horror, which is something I've only really seen in the world of Stephen King, and it's always outrageous. You mentioned Christine earlier, and I think people might be familiar with From a Buick 8, but
Right.
Uncle Otto's Truck is also really weird. It's about this man that's obsessed with this old abandoned truck that is across from his home, and he's sort of obsessed with it getting closer and closer. And his nephew or his son is kind of worried about him because he thinks he's sort of making it up. And at the end, the man is found dead and with like a horrified look in his eyes, and in his veins is just crude oil or just like black oil. Stephen King and his car horror again, and I live for it. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, it's going back and thinking about these again. There really is a whole, through line of oil in Skeleton Crew. I mean, there's,
Oh,
even with the raft,
oh yeah.
and then also with the Jaunt too. I mean, they do touch on
Mm,
in the oil industry.
yeah. Yes, they definitely do, because there's a certain element of environmental horror in the Jaunt that it never resonated with me until I checked it out again today, and it like seemed fairly prominent. So we'll get into that. So, if you're okay with it, I'm going to give you and our audience just like a little bit of back information on the story, The Jaunt itself. It was first published in the Twilight Zone magazine in 1981 before being added to Skeleton Crew in 1985. The story itself takes place in the 24th century when technology for teleportation, known as jaunting, is something that everybody uses. It's as common as flying on a plane, and it allows for instantaneous transportation basically anywhere in the solar system. So you can go from here to Mars in a second. So it really solves a lot of human and environmental issues, and a lot of those are sort of come down to transportation, specifically like transporting goods. So this is something that like really helps the environment. The term jaunting in the story is an homage to The Stars My Destination, which is a science fiction novel by Alfred Bester. And he actually, I believe, states that by name in this story. near the beginning. Before we get into like the weeds of what the story really is about, what would you say? Like, what would be your premise if I had a gun to your head? Like, how would you summarize the Jaunt?
I think it's a first flight story. I mean, I think everybody kind of remembers their first flight. I mean, you remember reading the Jaunt on, obviously it wasn't your first time in an airplane, but it was your first time reading the Jaunt. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember as a kid my first flight and my first ride in an airplane. So imagine if you're a kid in the future and your first ride is actually in a teleportation device
Mm.
at an airport. You might be a little more nervous than just riding in an airplane. So it's really just a family. It's I think it's the Oates family. The dad is Mark Oates. The wife I think is Marilise, and there's a son and daughter that
Mm-hmm.
sound like they're about the same age, Ricky and Patricia, or Ricky and Patty.
Yeah.
And the kids want to know the whole history of jaunting and teleporting. So what's strange is that it seems like their dad Mark has been like waiting to tell them this history for a very long time and really knows his shit. Like he really knows
Yeah.
what the history of the jaunt is, and it seems like he's written essays on the subject, and he is like ready to talk to
Yeah.
his kids about what jaunting is.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife is not crazy about it,
No.
but just goes through and tells how jaunting and teleportation was invented, and then what they had to do in order to have a safe jaunt.
Yeah, I find it the whole point of this father sort of telling the history of the Jaunt is to sort of soothe his family from their nerves. So, yeah, Mark Oates and his family are about to jaunt from New York City to Mars because Mark has a new job and it's transporting him to live on Mars for 2 years, and so they're all going together. And sort of to keep his kids from being too nervous, he's giving everyone a history lesson on the Jaunt, but he keeps out the like more gruesome details, which then we receive as the audience through his like narration. And it's scary as hell. So I'm going to start us off by giving like a little bit of a history of jaunting in the story. So we learn through Mark talking to his kids that, like, I think at this point it's hundreds of years ago in a fictional 1987, there's this eccentric scientist who accidentally discovers how to teleport in his lab when he sets up sort of two portals and accidentally teleports two of his fingers. So, like, severs two of his fingers from one portal to another. And then he realizes, hey, I've invented teleportation. And the first sort of living beings that they send through are mice. And when they send the mice through consciously, or sort of unconsciously, they arrive on the other side instantaneously, totally fine, totally healthy. But when they send these mice through consciously, they arrive instantaneously and alive, but they die of a heart attack almost immediately, or they have clearly gone completely insane. So there's some kind of stimuli that's affecting them in between the checkpoints that is causing them to die once they arrive, which is scary as hell. So in your sort of words, in your own like interpretation, what exactly is happening to people or beings that are transferred through this machine while conscious?
Well, I think the best way to put it is whether you're a mouse or a person, that your body goes to sleep, but your mind stays awake. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea is that, like, or the question really is, how long does your mind stay awake? And it's a really, really long time, and that's where the terror kind of starts to come
Yeah.
into play with that. You know, whether you're a test subject or you know, Ricky going in,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
teleport for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. So they do figure out as they start to test jaunting on human subjects that, yeah, if you go in unconscious, you don't notice anything. But when you go in consciously, while your body arrives instantaneously, your conscious mind and your like personality and everything that makes you is trapped in this white void of nothingness for what feels like an eternity. In the book or in the story, they surmise that it could be anywhere from a couple hundred years to a billion years of complete consciousness, but with nothing but whiteness to stimulate the brain. So you're just floating through eternity with nothing to stimulate you. And then a billion years later, you're finally back to reality, and the shock of coming back to our world is just too much for the sort of human heart to handle. And you generally go insane and have a heart attack like immediately, which is pretty fucked up. This is a certain kind of horror that this is the kind of horror that gets me the most, I would say. Why do you think this is so scary? Like, why is this concept so terrifying?
I think it's I think it's kind of a deeper question. I think it's really I think it's about trust in a way. I think and ultimately letting down your own children by telling them everything's going to be okay. And it's not okay for these kids, unfortunately. And the father tells his kids not to worry, and then the most horrific thing possible happens that we've been describing.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's yes, for sure. Like the idea of being stuck in like an infinite white void is terrifying, and something that we can't really comprehend. I mean, that's one of the lines in the Jaunt is it's longer than you think, and it's eternity in there. Is what somebody else says. So the terror and torture of being conscious, surrounded by nothingness for an eternity is totally unfathomable. But I think the real horror is the ending, and the screaming, and this kind of the insanity that happens.
So how would you summarize what happens at the end? What happens with Mark's son at the end of the story?
I remember one thing I forgot actually in the story. You mentioned it earlier. I forgot that the scientist that I think the character is Victor Karoon, who invents teleportation. I forgot that part where his fingers actually get teleported, the two fingers, which is so cool.
It's so cool.
Just the idea of that. I loved that touch.
Yeah, me too.
That I totally forgotten about because I just remember being horrified. But I also remembered it being a pill that you would have to take a pill to go to sleep, but it's actually gas. It's actually gas and so the son Ricky is actually like a really adventurous kid. He's always the one that's kind of doing the daring stuff, and so he doesn't take the gas. He decides not to take the gas because he wants to see what it's like. He's a curious.
And his dad
kid.
The dad is also kind of like shielding him from the horrifying parts of the story, so the kid doesn't really have a sense of how how important it is to take the gas. He doesn't understand that it's going to be like a fate so much worse than death. Yeah, and then at the end, it just ends with the dad waking up, and the mom is screaming, and I think the kid rips out his own eyes as they drag him away, and he's just screaming. It's what does he say at the end?
There's that line too where he talks about like that he rips out his eyes because they've just seen eternity, like out of the horror that they've just seen. He actually rip out his own eyes.
Oh, it's so I've read it so many times, and I was like, I'm not going to be freaked out. And just talking about it is affecting me right now. Yeah, the last thing he says as he gets dragged away after he's ripped out his eyes, as he's talking to his dad, as he's laughing, and he says, "It's longer than you think, Dad. Longer than you think." And it's so scary. I love it.
I know.
Yeah, I would say it like the concept of eternity for me, and I'm sure lots of other people, is like especially frightening. I remember in like grade, I think it was 3 or 4, we read Tuck Everlasting. Have you ever read Tuck Everlasting?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Tuck Everlasting is like this kid's book about this girl that falls in love with this boy, and the boy and his family has found the spring of eternal life. And so in the story, this beautiful young girl and this beautiful young boy fall in love, and over the story, she has to decide if she's going to drink from the spring of like living forever, and so she can be with her loved one forever and ever, or if she's not going to do it, and if she's going to just, live a normal life and die. And she, at the end, spoiler alert, she decides to not drink from the well, and she dies normally. and it's sad. But as a kid, I remember thinking, like, if she drank that live forever juice, like, what's gonna happen to her when the earth explodes one day? Like, are you just
Right.
floating around through space for eternity because you can't die? Like, that's horrifying. And I remember having that conscious thought as a kid reading this book. And so, like, this specific idea or type of horror really resonates with me. I don't like it. I also think it's kind of why people are so scared of hell. Because what could be
Well,
worse than, yeah,
that's interesting that you read Tuck Everlasting before you read the Jaunt, but
thousands of years, yeah.
but yet you still had that incredibly dark thought, which is really that's a big insight into your horror brain, Josh. That you were already
Thank
thinking
you.
that.
No, and it's like people that know me, like my close friends will know, like this is, it must be a specific kind of phobia that I have. I know you don't know me so well, but I'm going to get real with you because I think it relates to the topic. But
Let's
I
get
have
real.
like a specific type of agoraphobia, which is kind of specific, which is when I'm in open spaces. A good example would be like on a bridge. I'll get this panicky sensation that I'm going to lose gravity. Like all of a sudden, I'm just going to get like plucked from the earth and just fall into the sky. Like looking up would kind of be like looking down. It's kind of hard to explain, and it only affects me in like open spaces. But something about that phobia, which is pretty strong in me, like connects with this specific type of horror. This like the fear of the void or the fear of like endless eternity is just something that my brain does not appreciate or like.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of that's sort of a version of Vertigo a little bit. But I wonder if you're in the Jaunt and you're trapped in this white void. I mean, that's really that maybe the feeling. If maybe you can answer this for me, is the feeling that you're experiencing. Is it more of a body feel, or does it feel like it's more in your head?
It's a little bit of both. I think it
Yeah.
starts like in the head, but then it does sort of in. Yeah, Vertigo is an interesting comparison because it does sort of become that bodily kind of panic attack sensation. But yeah.
So if you're jaunting and your body is
Mm-hmm.
basically kind of not there really, are you still
Yeah.
are you getting that feeling too? Because I wouldn't want that sensation for eternity either, and I'm sure you wouldn't.
Right? No, I know. And that's what's
Not to
like,
scare you more.
hey, I mean, listen, it's already happened. It happened when I was 15 on that plane, man, for the first time.
Right.
And yeah, I'm not just reaching, right? Like the idea of, you said it too, like first flight sort of syndrome. There's something about flying that's just so scary that kind of gives me Jaunt vibes. Have you ever been afraid to fly? Is that something that you've ever sort of had to deal with?
I mean, I definitely remember my flight as like my first flight as a kid, but it was actually from Austin to Dallas, which is, for those that don't
Like,
know,
what, half an
it's
hour?
like 45 minutes. Yeah, you go up
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you go
yeah.
down, but
Yeah. Well,
it
I mean,
felt
those are the
longer
most
than that.
dangerous parts. Yeah, I'm sure it
Yeah,
did.
that's true. And I remember there was a flight attendant that came over and sat with me like the whole time, and then
Oh.
yeah, it was very sweet. And then she like kind of made sure I got to I think my aunt and uncle like in Dallas, so that was very nice. So it ended up being a great experience, and I couldn't wait to do it again.
And now you're married? Is that, this is your wife? That's a beautiful story.
My
How
mom actually was a stew for American Airlines back in like the 70s.
I think it sounds like a wicked cool career. I've known a couple over my life because I'm a gay man, and I just feel like there's a lot of gay men in
Right.
that industry. I'm not totally sure why.
Mhm.
But you get to travel for free, you get to hang out cool places, and the money doesn't seem to be that bad. It's always been something in the back of my mind that if I ever like learned a second language, it could be an interesting option.
Yeah, I have a friend that literally just started the new job, and then have a great friend of mine that's a captain who's a gay captain, and he's loving it.
Gay captain. Wow, he sounds popular.
Yep, just got his
Um,
license.
cool. Uh, so is it true? Do you have to know two languages to be a flight attendant, or that might not be the right term anymore?
I think it's definitely encouraged, but no, I don't think it's a requisite.
Oh, interesting. So so you never know.
You get a chance.
Um, so there's the first person in the jaunt, or the first human being that goes through consciously, is a condemned death row murderer in the story by the name of Rudy. I think, how do you pronounce it? Foggia? I don't know how to
Sounds
pronounce
right.
that. Yeah, so they talk about the first sort of test subject that they send through, and it's this death row inmate named Rudy, and he's been promised that if he lives through this experiment, which he doesn't totally know what it is, that he's going to get a full pardon upon finishing it. So he's like, well, I'm going to die otherwise, so I might as well give it a go. And so after 6 other inmates are jaunted under anesthesia successfully, he's the first person that they decide to test it out on consciously. And he goes through, and immediately on arrival, he has a massive heart attack and lives just long enough to say the famous line, "It's eternity in there." And it's scary as hell. In the story, they say that there are 30 human beings that we know about that have jaunted while consciously, voluntarily or otherwise, and they all die instantaneously or emerge completely insane. Now, there's one example of someone that gets sent through in the story that I'm wondering if you remember. So there was a man that murders his wife with the Jaunt machine. Do you remember this?
Yes, definitely.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that part? Because this is probably the section of the book or the story that might scare me the most.
Well, luckily for my wife, I had forgotten this part of the story too, and before I reread it. But I do remember. I remember the mob thing that we can touch on later. How the mob was using teleporting,
I
but
forgot about that.
this guy, and I liked the description too. I think so they had it was as a family as well, but I guess he was not happy in his marriage and used like their daughter's like jump rope to actually like tie up his wife and throw her into the like push her into to one of the pods.
Mhm.
But then he closes every possible exit, so she's basically just floating in there, and she's just jaunting for eternity, just in limbo, in this awful limbo, knowing that her husband just
Yeah.
killed her. But what was interesting is that when they go to trial, they can't really. There's no body, right? They can't really prove it. But he still, which was nice. It was nice to know that Stephen King was like, you know what, this guy still needs to go to jail. And so they were like, he was convicted.
I think I think he gets the death sentence too. But something
Oh, good.
I liked in the story is that Stephen King mentions that his attorney tries to argue that it wasn't murder because she's still alive, that she's still floating through the ethers, screaming and alive. And that's
It's a good
part
lawyer.
of
It's a good angle.
it's a good angle, but I think it's also part of why they gave him the death sentence, because I think it just like was just freaked everyone out even more just thinking
It's
about
worse.
it's so much worse.
Yeah.
God damn, I so much would rather die than live forever. It's something that is a constant theme in my life. Do not let me live forever. I really hope there's no heaven. I really hope it's just lights out. Because, like, we don't need to get too deep into this. But yeah, that's, I would say, the scariest part of the book for me. It's just this poor woman that is just forever just floating through the jaunt. No, thank you.
Yeah, the jaunt just makes us realize that we just want it to be quick. We just want the end to be quick.
We just want it to because we were totally fine for the quadrillion years that existed before we were born, and we're going to be totally fine for the quadrillion years after we die. But we wouldn't be fine as if that was conscious and it was scary and bad. Yeah, so that kind of covers the story. As you mentioned, it finishes off with the dad waking up on Mars, hearing his wife screaming, and that his son deliberately went through consciously and screaming out, "It's longer than you think, Dad, longer than you think." Not the happiest story, probably not something you should read on a plane if you're feeling anxious or depressed, but an incredible short story nonetheless.
Yeah, I wonder what Joe Hill thinks about this story.
I bet you he loves it.
Right.
Um, he's got some good short stories too. Have you ever read any of his collections?
I haven't. No, Joe Hill's a big blind spot for me. I've only read a couple of his books.
Oh, there's two collections that I'm aware of. One is 20th Century Ghosts, which is where I believe that's where the Black Phone is housed, And then there's the other one, which is Strange Weather, which is a little bit hit and miss, but you can't win them all. So yeah, would you be interested in a bit of a seminar on the production history behind the adaptation of the Jaunt?
I'd be very interested. Please, please
Oh,
proceed.
wow. Okay. So in 2015, Plan B, which is the production company owned by Brad Pitt, they got the rights to produce the Jaunt, and they signed on two filmmakers, Andy and Barba Muschietti. Am I saying that right? I always get nervous and I say it wrong. How do you say their name? Please help me.
Andy Muschietti, yeah. Right.
Muschietti. I don't. I get.
Yeah.
I panic. I panic, and I always mistake it. But you know what? I got it right. Anyway, so they hired these two, and it was, I believe, after the success of their film Mama. Don't hold it against me if I'm incorrect, but I believe Mama had already happened, and they were sort of like the cool kids in Hollywood, and they were getting a lot of different offers to do a lot of different projects, and this was one of them. Now, as you could have guessed, time goes by and they did not end up making the Jaunt. Instead, of course, they made the It films, and this left the Jaunt captainless. What are your thoughts on these two? How do you feel about them?
I mean, I remember watching Mama, and I thought it was, visually stunning, and then It Chapter 1 was fantastic, and It Chapter 2 was, left something to be desired for me, but still, um, that's another, Book of Kings that's has a strange ending. So, and it had a strange ending in the movie as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so I'm interested in seeing what he does with the Flash and what they're doing.
Oh, they're doing the
Yes, I
Flash.
think they're moving on to that, so they're getting out of the Stephen King world. And you'd think that maybe like somebody like Mike Flanagan or somebody would be involved, but I think he was going to do one of the books that I wasn't really crazy about, one of Stephen King's recent books, Revival, just kind of
Mhm.
like his like Carnival Frankenstein story a
Oh,
little
I've
bit.
read it. Oh
That
yeah.
gets that gets has a really weird ending.
Very weird, kind of
Yeah,
Lovecraftian
which
vibes.
is kind, and it maybe has a connection to the Jaunt maybe a little bit too, just because. And I want to ask you about this later, like another kind of dimension that happens. Um,
Yeah, that's yes, yes.
but it's yeah, because the revival. I think he was going to work on that. I think for a little while, and I think even like Russell Crowe is going to be in that.
Huh,
As a Methodist minister, but I think then
weird.
Flanagan went on to do Midnight Mass, which is kind of interesting. So he still
Yes, you can,
views
and
those
you can't really
religious
do
themes.
both. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think
they're too similar.
yeah. So I mean, Muschietti doing the Jaunt could have been interesting, and Flanagan as well.
Yeah, Flanagan I'd almost prefer. I think also just because I'm like a bit of a Flanagan apologist, no matter what he does. Yeah. Have you read? Fuck. Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix.
Yes, Grady Hendrix. Sure, I've read a lot of his stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a big fan. He's actually been on the pod, not to brag. And I
that's great.
believe they're adapting that for HBO. Have you heard about this?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so that should be interesting. I don't know if they're actually going to be like writing, directing it, or if they're just producing. I'm not sure. But I saw that, yeah, they're teaming up with Charlize Theron to adapt that one. And I've read literally everything by Mr. Grady, but not that one. Have you checked that one out?
Yeah, yeah, and I was so happy for Grady hearing about that news, and
You know?
I really liked his book Horror Store too. That's kind of about
Yeah.
the haunted IKEA, like
It's genius.
STOR. Yeah,
It's so genius. He's just a goddamn genius, and I cannot
yeah.
wait for him to be as famous as Stephen King. My favorite of his is, oh god, they're so good. Southern Book Club, Vampire
hmm
Killer Ladies, that was incredible. And My Best Friend's Exorcism, god
Yeah.
damn, just a classic.
I'm,
Um,
I've, I'm I'm on a really bad kick right now, buying all the paperbacks from Hell on Instagram. I need to stop.
Oh, that's so funny you say that. I was for the whole month of October, some fool gave me the keys to Dread Central's Instagram account, and I was doing something I was calling the Midnight Gallery, and every like 11 p.m. of October, I posted like a spooky or outrageous like paperback from Hell cover. and it was, I mean, a little bit stolen from Grady Hendrix, but it was a really fun activity for me. So thank you, everyone that allowed that to happen.
Yeah, you really for anyone that doesn't just before we get back to the Jaunt, for anyone that doesn't have that coffee table book, that the Paperbacks from Hell, it's a
Mm-hmm.
compendium of all these ridiculous horror paperbacks. Some are actually pretty good. Some that I read, but from the 70s and 80s, mostly, and how like so it's a rabbit hole that you can go down for sure. But some of them, because of that book, now you're these like paperbacks that used to be $2 are now like $25 if you can find them.
Oh, that's so sad. Yeah, because they're getting their due, and they're like, just the artwork alone is worth the price of admission for some of these insane ones. Have you ever seen? Oh, there's some really infamous ones like Daddy's Little Girl, which is like the scariest one I've ever
Mhm.
seen, or The Children's Ward. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, and then there's one Pranks that I just got too that's got a great cover as well, and then another one called 666, and it has there's it's the kind of double cover where you have a little hole, and then you open up the cover, and then there's the a secondary cover.
Oh, I
So
love
that's
that
great.
shit. Or like the
Yeah.
holographic covers,
Yes.
incredible.
All the lenticular
Um,
stuff, so fun.
yeah. Have you ever encountered a copy of the VHS Bleeders IRL? Because I love that kind of
No,
shit.
I haven't.
Yeah, there's this like, I want to say early 90s or 80s. I could be wrong. Forgive me. VHS horror movie called Bleeders. And if
Right.
you, the packaging is like, there's like the soft cover with like liquid underneath. So if you touch it, it's like this.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Yes, I have
it's
seen
like,
that. Yes.
yeah, it's fucking incredible. And I'm sure the movie is like, I'm sure it only exists to be a cover. Like I'm sure the movie itself is true garbage terror. But
Right. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. Yeah, I have seen that. I
I
haven't
did
seen the
an
movie. I haven't seen the movie. I've seen the cover.
Yeah, and I feel like no one ever has. I did an article for Dread not that long ago about like the VHS covers that really fucked us up as kids, but the movies aren't necessarily that good. And one that always I remember is Blood Beach. Have you ever seen the cover of
Yes.
Blood? What
Yeah,
the
that
fuck
was a
is
fun
that?
article. Yeah, it
Oh,
was a bit.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, basically the whole inspiration for that article was the memory of Blood Beach, which is just like a lady in a hole screaming on the beach. It's not scary. It's just really weird. So yeah, time goes by and Andy and Barbara don't make the jaunt, they make it. And during this time, Brad Pitt, um, the captain of Plan B, wins an Oscar, and the genre films on his dashboard kind of get swept to the side. And so I'm talking about World War Z 2 and the jaunt. Neither end up getting made. And so about 6 years go by, and within that time frame, Stephen King's popularity kind of goes up and down. I think the It films really catapulted him back into the limelight of like being as popular as he ever was. But then after that, we were starting to see a little bit of Stephen King exhaustion, I think, in the zeitgeist. Films like Doctor Sleep were underperforming, and certain projects were sort of not getting made. And I do think that in the world of Stephen King, we do see sort of peaks and valleys of popularity. And I think after it, we were sort of sliding into a bit of a valley. Um, but then all of a sudden, February 2021, a new update on the jaunt did appear. So, Fear of the Walking Dead co creator Dave Erickson was announced to be adapting the jaunt into a TV series. Drew, how do you feel about this very short story sort of pivoting from a film into a TV show? How does that sound to you?
I like it. I mean, I don't know exactly. I think it should be maybe a mini series. I don't see it going for 8 episodes or 10 episodes or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, but I mean, I like. I mean, you've got yeah. You said Dave Erickson, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's behind like Ozark and House of Cards, and or I guess like MRC TV is right,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
production company. So I
yes.
mean, and The Outsider too. So I mean, there's Stephen King right there. So I don't know if it would where it would find a home. I guess it would be Netflix or
I guess
HBO Max maybe,
it's
or
got to be one of
um,
those two, right? Yeah.
yeah. And I like Fear the Walking Dead for the most part. But I don't know how you
Yeah, it's like
bring this whole story into a series. But I like the idea better than just like a 2 hour film.
well, the idea of a tour film was always kind of strange to me because of, you know, well, I guess the way that the story works. It's I think it would be challenging to adapt this into like a spectacle 2-hour film. But the idea of making it into something smaller, into a show where you could sort of get into the nitty gritty of this eccentric scientist and sort of the politics of what he was up to. Like, you could take it slow and maybe not even show that much of the terror, because this is the kind of horror that I think needs to be shown as little as possible. I think why this short story works so well is because the reader is imagining it themselves. Like, this is something that I think could easily not work on camera. But yeah, if they do it smaller over a series of episodes, I actually think it could work. I remember thinking like this could actually even be like not the world's worst stage adaptation if you don't
Mm-hmm.
even see the abyss at all, and it's just sort of about these people toiling in labs or in offices and stuff like that. That's kind
You
of
could
where
feel like
I'm
a
sitting
David
on that.
Copperfield show, where they could just pop out of different places
Yes.
around the
Oh,
auditorium.
I love.
But
I actually love that. Yeah.
but also,
Yeah.
how do you do it? It's like, would there? I guess you'd have to have a series of flashbacks, right? I mean, with
Hmm.
with Victor, the inventor, and him toiling with the mice and losing a couple of his fingers and going through all of his trials and tribulations. And maybe you do something where it's like like airport, and you have flight
Hmm.
attendants, and you have them kind of being characters too, and seeing kind of the inner workings of it. Then
Oh.
you can bring the mob in a little bit too. But I don't know if you have like an episode that shows you know the um the husband and wife and that murder, exactly what you can do. But I think you could
Yeah.
probably have a few episodes with the mob,
I was just
or
thinking
I think
that,
you could
like,
play
at
with that.
least one. I love the idea
Yeah,
of there being a whole episode about the mob and showing them, like, do you think they were killing people and then sending them through? Do you think they were sending them through alive? Just out of curiosity. In your interp.
I think it's if you betrayed them, and if you were a snitch,
Mm.
they sent you through alive.
Yeah, there's
That's
probably
what I think.
different tiers of what they're gonna do to you. Yikes! Don't do it to me. Don't get involved with the mafia. Okay, just
Right.
stay clear of those guys. Yeah, I'd love to see a whole episode about the mob, and another whole episode about the guy that murders his wife. And there's a lot of like little aspects of the story that you could really stretch out into full episodes, and I kind of like that idea.
It's fun to
So
think about.
it's so fun to think about, and I'm very interested to see how they're doing it. You said you have seen Fear of the Walking Dead. Is there anything about that show that's like sort of worth like noteworthy? Is it sort of different at all from the normal Walking Dead season, or is it sort of the same kind of gig?
I mean, eventually it kind of ends up being, just a tale of survival again. But,
Mhm.
I think I like how it starts kind of from, patient zero, so to speak, and spend times in Mexico, and then it's in Texas. It's all shot here in Austin, or most of it is.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, I like it, and I like the idea of having Morgan, one of the main characters, obviously from Walking Dead, coming over and starting off that spinoff. So I think it's been pretty successful.
Cool. So, in your opinion, you think Dave Erickson is like a suitable dude to take up this job?
Yeah, and I like it's somebody that I like names that I wouldn't have thought of myself.
I do
I
too.
mean, yeah. So I think that's fun. Like somebody that comes to mind for me, like maybe like somebody like Charlie Brooker or something that did the showrunner for Black
Oh,
Mirror.
I'm mad that I didn't think of that because it feels so obvious, but at the same time so perfect. But
Mhm.
but I know what you mean. Like, that guy has done this kind of thing so many times before. There's that episode of Black Mirror there's just a bunch of episodes of Black Mirror that have similar vibes to this. But there's that one specifically that I cannot remember much detail of, where someone gets put into fuck it. There's just Black Mirror shit that's very similar to this. So there's an MRC rep that by the name of Elise Henderson that had some statements about Dave. I'm just gonna share it and see if it works for this. But this is what Elise had to say. So they've admired Dave's visionary creative work and are thrilled to welcome him to MRC. They're a fan of his craft and think that he's an ideal partner to expand on the world of Stephen King and to develop more stories as they continue to expand. So yeah, it sounds like they may try to hold on to this dude for other Stephen King adaptations as well. So if you're okay with it, let's head off into our final section, which is conclusions.
Sure.
We kind of touched on this already, but Jaunt for TV versus film, where would you sort of prefer to see it land in an ideal world?
I mean, if I could really have my ideal picked just from what we were talking about earlier, is that just our kind of love of the cheesy TV movies, I would have liked to have had it just be a 90s movie by Mick Garris,
Oh, fuck
that came out,
yes.
and so it's already done, and we'd be talking about,
Oh my god.
that. But the way that everything's produced now, I'm actually really excited for it to be a television series, and they'll have a lot more control and a lot more time to kind of develop it. But I think they could go off the rails pretty easily with it. I think just basing an entire series just off of technology and kind of in this basic horror that you probably shouldn't show because it's more effective if you don't. I don't know how long that's gonna keep people's interest. I mean, it's going to be like like a horror version of Quantum Leap. Maybe it's not going to work like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't
actually
know what.
that's appropriate. Weirdly, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it'll be interesting. But I wanted to ask you a question though. Can I ask you this?
Of course.
Okay. Well, you don't know what I'm asked, but
Well,
just the idea of all this interconnectivity, right? With Stephen King, with the Dark Towers, and the kind of interdimensional things that happen, especially in the Dark Tower or in the Mist. Do you think that the Void and the Jaunt is connected to that,
it's
or
such
do
a
you think
good.
it's or do you think it's a different kind of white void because there's no creatures that
Yeah,
we know of?
it's nothing. It's complete
So
nothingness.
so if they do the Jaunt, if they do this, I don't want them to get into Lovecraft territory.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really good question. I think yes. I think that it shouldn't. I think it would be so easy to tie it into those extra dimensional Stephen King stories that are already out there. But I think what's scary about the Jaunt is that it's kind of the inverse of that. It's not
Right.
extra dimensional. It's like complete nothing. And I think that's what sort of separates it. I don't know if Stephen King would agree with that, but yeah, I would hope no. I don't want to see kind of like ginormous floating monsters in there, which is its own kind of scary that I like too, but yeah, for me the Jaunt is like the inverse. It's the scariness is the lack of monster in a way. What do you
Yeah.
think? Do you have an
Well,
opinion on that too?
I agree with that. I like that, but I can see them maybe, if you wanted, you could maybe use the idea of the Jaunt and that technology to actually like explore King's worlds. You could jaunt into another Stephen King story.
Oh,
Or
yes.
you
So
could,
like
which are
never mind the abyss, but like the actual process of jaunting itself could take you into the different worlds.
right. So I think that would be kind of fascinating, but so, and I don't think that's where they're going, what they're thinking. But if you're talking about something like Dave Erickson and them wanting him to stay
Mhm.
possibly in the Stephen King kind of business for a little while, that would be maybe an interesting portal, to
Oh,
get into some of his other
see,
properties.
I like that. It's like the opening of A Nightmare Before Christmas where they're in the woods where every door is a different holiday, but
Right.
it's every
Yes.
door is a different Stephen King story. Wow. They need MRC, you need to hire us. Just reach
That's right.
out. We're easy to find. Um yeah. So do you think something that we do on this podcast I didn't necessarily let you know is at the end we decide because you and I have all the power, is this project actually going to get made? Do we think the Jaunt is really going to come to fruition? And I'm going to ask you first. Unlike a lot of projects that we've covered, there has been an update fairly recently, which could sort of sway us. But I think the question is still worth asking. Are we ever going to get to see the Jaunt?
No, I don't think it's going to happen. And especially just
Oh,
what we were just talking about too. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go with it, and then that can be, the death of a project
oh,
sometimes.
that is ballsy because the last update was February 2021. But yeah, it's such a weird project. I just like have a hard time imagining how they're going to adapt it successfully. And it just reeks of a King property that isn't actually going to happen. So I kind of agree with you. Although I was sort of screwed before, because when I did my first episode, touching base on the Jaunt, was like, I don't know, 2 weeks before this Dave Erickson update happened.
Right.
So I think the Murphy's Law is always going to bite me in the ass. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say we are going to see this for television, but
Okay.
I don't know necessarily what the qual is going to be. But part of me is just like, I really am like curious as all hell to see this happen. I just want to see it. I'm such a fan. I'm such a fan of the Jaunt.
I know. Well, I mean, maybe we'll see some new updates, I guess, soon. But for now, it's just going to exist in our mind.
In development hell, I mean, yeah, I mean,
Forever
it
and
has
ever.
gotten an official development hell episode, and not just any development hell episode. Our 1-year anniversary episode. Pew pew.
Congratulations! It's amazing.
Thank you. You don't see them, but there are balloons everywhere. I'm wearing a little hat. This is a big day that I completely forgot about until like 5 minutes ago.
I'm gonna buy you something, I swear.
Oh my god! I hope it's not a jaunting machine, because I'm gonna misuse that. My poor wife. We'll never see that coming. Drew, where can you be found on the internet if you so wish to be found?
Dreadcentral.com, and if I bring myself to tweet, I'm on Twitter and Instagram every once in a while too.
Wow, so passionate about social media. He's
I need to get reinvested. I really do.
Well, it's true. I mean, listen. You find him on Dread Central author page. Tons of amazing reviews and articles. We're big fans. And thank you, Drew, for being on our 1-year anniversary extravaganza special. It means a lot.
Thank you, Josh. Congrats again.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back with another episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.